SMB Investor with Nick Bryant and Sean Smith.
Hey everyone, you got Sean Smith here, managing partner at Search Fund Ventures and founder of SMB Investor Network. And today I'm joined by Tivan Amour, founded Upwind, a sales and growth agency and business focused on supporting founders of all types, including searchers, independent sponsors, and really all business owners on sales organization, sales operations, and growth initiatives more generally. So Tivan, thanks so much for joining.
Happy to be here.
Why don't you kick it off by telling us a little about your background, how you got into growth and what skills you built along the way and what led you to start Upwind?
Sure. So I'm a serial entrepreneur. Started my first company in 2011, failed it over the course of 10 months after moving to Boston. And over the course of the last 15 years, I've started companies in e-commerce, manufacturing, real estate, and most recently software. Had the good fortune of selling my software company in 2021 to a unicorn, and it was kind of right place, right time. We did a lot of the right things, but I learned a lot about how market timing in the startup world can be a really powerful force. And the way I got into the search space was as of 2020, I started investing in startups and advising startups and really love working with founders and entrepreneurs of all types. I try to be the mentor that I feel like I never had, the one that will always pick up the phone, the one that doesn't go dark, the one that kind of gives it to you straight or pushes through like your ego or your insecurities. And I love doing it. So I'm usually texting with maybe 20 entrepreneurs at any given time across, all different industries and verticals. And I happen to have a friend who's been investing in search for a while. And as we were getting coffee, I was talking about some of my advisory practice with startups. And he said, I've got a bunch of CEOs in ETA that could probably use, some of your mentorship, particularly on the sales and growth side. I was often describing a lot of playbooks that we were using in the startup world, and he was like, we could probably use that. I know that a lot of my ETA entrepreneurs are smart folks, a lot of accomplishment. Very few of them have knocked on doors, for better or for worse. And so that was how it started. And as I started to work with my first few ETA entrepreneurs, the thing that I discovered about these CEOs that was remarkably refreshing versus the startup entrepreneurs that I was used to is they were a lot more measured and a lot more patient. And I say that, kind of knowing myself to be a little bit the opposite as a serial startup entrepreneur. So these are folks who have intense grit. Usually when I meet someone who has acquired a business in the last 18 months, they probably, went through 5 potential purchases, a bunch of LOIs that didn't go through. And so the amount of grit and determination these folks have, I think that experience is a really good filter for the type of person you're going to end up working with. And so, so that's why I'm here.
Very cool. And I, we've shared this on whether it's LinkedIn or other channels, but I would say at least 95% of the acquisition pitches or capital raise pitches we see from searchers and independent sponsors say that one of the key ways they're going to drive growth and create value post-close is by setting up a sales team or bolstering sales operations, right? So it's always there in one way, shape, or form. The ability for that, buyer, that CEO to actually execute on it is where the most variation comes in, right? I think everyone wants to do it. Their ability to actually do it varies quite a bit. So folks like yourself are bringing a very important capability to the space. And I guess just, you've had a great background as a startup entrepreneur. Lots of startup entrepreneurs. You kind of caught wind of ETA. But what would you say, besides CEO having grit and patience and those kind of qualities, what is driving you towards this end of the entrepreneurship market versus what might pull you back into 0 to 1 type startups?
Right. I should say I still work with a bunch of 0 to 1 startups. I don't think that'll ever leave my DNA completely. I'd say number one, after I left my acquire company in 2023, I had a real heart-to-heart with my wife and thought about okay, we've got some options here. What do I actually want to spend my time doing? And it came back to, okay, I have to find people that I want to spend the majority of my time with. I think a lot of entrepreneurs don't necessarily think about, if X, Y, or Z is my customer, that's who I'm going to be talking to most of the time. And it really does, tend to kind of determine your lifestyle and whether or not you're happy. So I've definitely been involved in businesses where I have a certain amount of disdain for the customer after a certain amount of time. Maybe I don't resonate with them. But when I found ETA entrepreneurs, I think the combination of the humility that's required to come into a business that you didn't start, the grit that's required, the patience, I just think it filters for really awesome people. So that's number one. Sorry to reiterate it, but it's the truth. The second thing is the last company that I sold was a text message marketing company. It was one of those companies where we did some things right and a bunch of things wrong. But the rising tide of text message marketing for e-commerce businesses lifted all boats. And so I told myself, if there's any learning that I'm going to take from this experience, it's pick the market really well and pick it in a way where you know that the growth is there and that the demand is not something you have to worry about. And so the silver tsunami is something that, we can see with our own eyes. It's something that is real. So I think that like from just a purely surgical tactical perspective, I do think ETA is a great place for anyone to focus their efforts on right now if they bring some skills to the table. And then maybe I was thinking about this a couple of days ago. I do have a pet peeve after running a lot of very operations heavy businesses. When I call a business and they don't pick up the phone, they don't have a voicemail. Or, when I get to a website and I'm trying to fill out a form and something's broken. Like I experience this at least once a day, if not several times a day, particularly in medicine and healthcare. You feel it all over. And I think this gives me an excuse to kind of chip away at that pet peeve and solve these everyday problems that we have, with legacy and enduring businesses.
And so it's a mix of, it's the people, it's the market, and then it's a bit personal, right? You gotta get rid of that pet peeve. So that's good. What kind of skill sets and, concepts that you learned in the kind of high growth startup world and being a sales leader, and taking companies from nothing to pretty substantial amounts of revenue and a large number of customers. What kind of skill sets and concepts did you learn doing that are directly transferable to this ETA world and these similar types of sales motions? And what would you say might be a little bit, of a different ball game?
Yeah. Some of the things so let me just make sure I understand the question. The question is, what are some of the skill sets and the strategies that we're bringing from the startup space that are transferable, and what are some things that are totally new in ETA, or some dynamics that are new in ETA?
Yeah, and I guess the last piece would be, what are some things that maybe you've found worked in startup world that don't work in ETA?
Yeah.
Right?
I'll try to be concise. So the number one thing that I've seen across ETA and startups comes down to employees, because the employees is a really big factor when you acquire a business, and it's something that can't be overstated, right? The team that you have, that you inherit in ETA, is going to determine a lot of what you work on when you get there. And it can take time, because it's not something, people are not something you can kind of just rip out when you first get there, and the relationships you have to build. So the number one thing we learned across the last decade, across my partners and my many dealings, is when we're hiring people, everything comes down to basically one variable, and it's, are they happy people or are they sad people? And so we ended up having to create a rule for ourselves: don't hire sad people. We looked back at every single person across several businesses. This is the software business, e-commerce business, real estate business. Every time we hired someone where they ended up being a problem down the line, or they ended up not contributing, what we thought they were going to, it came down to them not being happy in some way, and that mentality kind of, pervading the rest of the company, the rest of the team. So that's something that I have found to be very much the case in ETA. And there's an added element there where you have some folks that have been at these companies for a very long time. So this combination of I don't know if it's, whether or not they're not satisfied with life or not satisfied with their job, whatever it is, when I get into some of these companies, I see that same aura that, we learned in startups to kind of stay away from. So that's one thing that I definitely think is relevant. I've seen several of our companies bring in a lot of new energy from new folks who up the ante, so to speak, and bring a lot of positive vibes, and it can be, revolutionary to the team when combined with several other strategies. Another thing that I learned the hard way in startups is just how much the details can matter with a sales strategy. We used to say the dollars are in the details. So as a 0 to 1 person who's like very sales oriented, I've had the tendency as a CEO to do a very quick pass at whatever strategy we are trying. So email marketing, we try 3 different variations to one population, 2 populations targets, and then we're done. It's like, that didn't work. And we only do a 3 email sequence. And we only do it for 1 month. We don't come back in a different, time when some of these things are temporal in nature, right? So there's a bunch of things we don't test. And then we might look at a competitor company and say, well, how did they get to 40 million in revenue when we got to, I had the benefit of seeing this when I sold to a company that was doing several hundred million in revenue. And we were doing single digits. And when I got in and I was part of this global sales team and the executive team, I led a sales team and looked at what we were actually doing. And I was like, so we actually just tested more and figured out that like this subject line was the one that works. And this is how many emails you send. And this is actually how you tweak the target to make sure that their buying window is open. So, the way that I think is transferable to ETA is I can't tell you how many times we've been doing a cold calling sequence for a client, or we've done outreach on LinkedIn, and the initial results were okay or tenuous at best. And then we figured out that we had to add one buying signal, or we had to start our conversations with one sentence, and everything changed. So that's something that I really take to heart in both industries is this not working because we haven't had enough patience and we haven't tried it for long enough? We haven't tried enough things, or is this just fundamentally the wrong channel, the wrong approach? And then the other thing that I think changed the nature of our businesses somewhere in the teens was when we discovered the entrepreneurial operating system, or what's also commonly known as, it's from the book Traction by Gino Wickman. To boil it down, it's a very complex operating system for businesses. Are you familiar with it?
Yep, we're fans of EOS.
Beautiful. So I don't think there's really any company that like follows it, to the letter of the law. But one of the components that worked well for us is this weekly metrics meeting for leadership and often for sales teams. And essentially you have these key metrics that, each person is an owner of. So if you are, one of the main salespeople, you may have a weekly metric of how many meetings, did you book and go to, how many new dollars in sales did you bring in, and so on and so forth. And for the CEO, it might be something else, and for COO, it might be something else. I've rolled this out with countless startup teams to great effect. Whereas I used to be very managerial, just having this meeting was just an eye opener because people kind of manage themselves once they have a number and they know what they have to do. It also really focuses the conversations in the company around the things that matter, because everything starts and ends with the numbers that we're all looking at. When I rolled this out with companies in ETA, it's been an even more remarkable shift because it's so different than what a lot of these companies are used to. A lot of companies might have a whiteboard. It's like not always updated. Sometimes everything's just in the mind of the founder and the people don't necessarily know if there are any goals. But bringing in very motivated people and sharing this way of looking at the world, I've seen huge impact on that on a sales team.
Yeah, it's a great tie-in. Business operating system concepts and sales in general are so intertwined in many ways. And a lot of ETA folks are, seeing more and more adoption, or we're seeing more and more adoption of EOS, Pinnacle, these other kind of business operating systems, or pieces of them, to you said. You put it right. No one's following them probably directly to the letter of the law, but there's aspects that are really helpful for running a business and growing.
How commonplace would you say it is?
How commonplace would I say EOS is implemented across businesses?
Or
I would say
these operating systems.
Yeah, it takes probably about 12 months or so for folks to start really, say 6 to 12 months until businesses are kind of stabilized and ready to be implementing like proper aspects like documenting processes and doing all that stuff. But I think the weekly scorecard is something that more folks could do earlier on. Just, from the sample I have more insight into, it's probably 50 to 60% or so, if not even maybe a little more than that from folks we get. We talk about weekly scorecards or management, leadership cadences, things of that nature. So
That's
yeah,
impressive.
I think it's growing because a lot of people are talking about it, right? So yeah, it's a good pointer, but I want to go back to the sales strategy piece because I think that's most interesting for this conversation. So the concept that there's a lot of detail in defining these strategies and that you can easily gloss over something by making assumptions that, oh, the subject line was wrong, so we're going to try a whole new batch, or the ICP, we got it wrong, we're going to go find a new ICP. But maybe, like you said, it was a matter of timing. So what are some tips for folks that may be struggling to nail down that sequence, whether it's cold call, email, whether it's door to door, what have you, right? What are some tips to speed up the process of really figuring out what's right and what's not?
Yeah. So what we do at Upwin, I can kind of give a little bit of a summary of what we do and maybe describe how you might do something like that yourself as well.
Yeah.
Um, Obviously, when you buy a business, the biggest nut that you're trying to crack is the growth equation. And it's not so much one lever you can pull that, you know, leads to meteoric success. It's like kind of a combination or a series of moves, and you're not really sure what that combination is going to be. So the best way to think about us is we're a sales experimentation team that helps you figure out all of the things that are going to lead to the growth of your business. And we do everything from phone outreach, email outreach, LinkedIn, partnerships, referral generation, CRM setup, automations, sales team hiring, sales team training, basically all of the things, all the hypotheses you might have about what would grow a business, we help you implement it in record time. And when it starts working, we'll scale any of those things up as needed. And so the way that we actually run this is we'll build a testing matrix. So when we onboard a company, we figure out kind of what all of the potential areas of growth are. We rank order them with our CEOs and our executive teams, and we'll build a testing matrix with metrics on how much did we quote unquote spend in this channel. Sometimes you're not actually spending anything, but what would it cost if a full-time person was doing it? What were the results? And kind of an ongoing analysis of, is this something we should continue to test into? Should we move on? Why or why not? And that's something you can do yourself. I think the biggest thing that we look for if getting started is the problem, for anyone out there, biggest thing we look for is, are there things that are being done in this space right now for growth that this business has never tried? Are there competitors or complementary companies that sell to the same ICP that are having great success with a particular channel, and we've just never tried it? If so, uh, that's where we start.
Yeah, that's a really first of all, the service and the way that you've put it together is fantastic. And I think for any investor or buyer listening to this, if 95% of people are saying they want to improve sales, but probably 30, maybe at best 30% of those people have, background doing the things that Tivan just mentioned. This is an area where it seems like there's a lot of value creation, right? For someone like yourself who's bringing that to the table. Because if you're, there's sales playbooks and there's things of that nature, but there's no real, to your point, path that says if you try things this way, you're going to learn this and you're eventually going to arrive at the perfect funnel that converts at this amount. It's not like that. You've got to experiment and you have to have experience experimenting. Otherwise, you could be experimenting in the wrong direction for far too long, right? So these are great tips on where to get started.
Yeah. I think the problem with I've worked with countless vendors and agencies over the years, and the problem I always found is it just feels very deterministic. It's like, we do this and you're going to spend $10,000 a month, and then is it going to work? Yeah, sure. Maybe, probably, right? Maybe. I don't know. But the reality is, especially when you're coming into a new business, it takes a really long time to really figure out what's up and what's down. The only way to figure that out is to constantly be trying things. So our insight, and we didn't start this way, but our insight was that to get things right here, it's actually the agency itself is an experimentation agency. It's not just a sales agency. It's not a marketing agency. It is experimentation in all of the ways that you can potentially grow.
Yeah. And that's super important to understand, right? Because if you don't know what the realm of the possibility is, the realm of possible is, and if you don't know how to run these experiments, again, that's probably the most important strategic skill set there is. And having someone like you supporting there and then handing off eventually, which is the next thing I'd love to talk about, to folks who can run the playbooks that your experiments define and that you develop, right? So once you've kind of run these experiments, you've done your matrix and identified that, hey, cold calling, when we do it at this time or this year with this kind of call to action and to this ICP works really well, much more effective and much higher ROI than, email, blah, blah, blah. How do you then support, CEOs with building an organization around that?
Yeah. It definitely depends on the particular industry and how the business operates. I think the the thing I've seen fail most often is working with traditional recruiters to find people. I have seen success if the organization is big enough. So like we have one $20 to $30 million a year company in our portfolio that typically always has a recruiter on staff that understands the industry. Those companies can be very dangerous, but a lot of small companies don't actually have that, right? So it's the CEO or it's one of the other executives doing that job. And so maybe they'll outsource it to a recruiter. So we've been hiring people for a very long time across a bunch of different industries. So we can serve as the recruiter, manage that process. The hardest thing is finding people in industry that you don't really have to train too much on the ins and outs of the industry. And so we're really good at creating conversations with those people and getting them in front of executives and CEOs. I think the other thing that we've had quite a bit of success with is when we figure out the right type of growth person to hire. Um, Basically, there's a few types of people that we've seen successful depending on the industry. There are hunters, which basically bifurcate into two types. There's kind of the inside sales hunter that is good at calling and emailing. And often in a lot of these industries, there's the outside sales person, field sales, that is running around and shaking hands and kissing babies. We've had a lot of success. Oh, sorry. And then the third one is the farmer, the person that picks up the phone and nurtures accounts and can close deals when the uh, demand is inbound. We've had a lot of success with managing all of these types of folks and helping onboard them, either if they're new employees or if they are existing employees that maybe need to run a new playbook to test some sort of growth experiment. So I think that if there's any like learnings that we've had so far, it's kind of a methodology of servant leadership. So these people are professionals. If you're not hiring someone who's a professional, if they're straight out of college, it's almost always the wrong call for a business that's trying to grow tomorrow, depending on the role. But for the most part, if we're talking about growth, we hire professionals. These people already know what they're doing and they've had success in some way. And you've hired them on the basis that they have some demonstrable pattern of success. So the main key to treating them like professionals and like adults is to say, I know that you're a winner. What do you need in order to show me that you're a winner and to advance your career and do better than you've ever done? And that's the methodology we take. So, for one company, we have a pretty complex CRM system that these salespeople live in, the field salespeople. It has location-based maps in it so that they know where all their accounts are and they can prioritize which accounts they go to. So we built that from scratch. And when a new salesperson first arrives, we teach them how to do that. We get them integrated into the system. We create custom automations just for them, for their style of work. Every single one of them has a slightly different way they like to use the CRM. And then we are always one text message away from changing something in the system for them. We try to make sure our SLA is within an hour or so anytime they hit us up, because they might be hitting 30 accounts in a day, and it's really frustrating if you're in the middle of the interstate, something's not working, and it could be the difference between a $50,000 order.
Super interesting. That level of support goes far beyond, most or any kind of growth agency I've come across, right? And you can only do that if you've been in kind of sales and growth as an operator. I think that's the big piece, and that's the background you bring to the table. So, the last kind of topic I'd love to talk about with you today is just for investors looking at deals, talking to folks about, how they're going to improve sales, the sales organization and hire a salesperson post close, or that they're going to run sales themselves. How can investors diligence and really form an opinion or an assessment on, the credibility of that in any given deal?
Yeah. The way I like to think about it, and it's borrowed from my startup experience as well, but as an investor, I just think about what are the bottlenecks of the business right now and how easy is it going to be for us to remove those bottlenecks? So, first bottleneck, people. Is this business kneecapped right now because its people are not the people that it needs to grow? One thought, I've personally never bought a business, so this may not be the right strategy, but what I would do if I were buying a business tomorrow, before engaging in a conversation with the current owner, I would probably try to secret shop the business and get a sense of who it is I'm interacting with on the sales and support side, because that'll tell you a lot about whether or not there's room for opportunity. So there are other ways to, of course, diligence the company, but the people of the company. But as you know, it gets a little hairy when you're trying to meet some people in the business at the same time you're buying it, and the owner doesn't want to like kind of divulge everything that's going on. So I think secret shopping is a really interesting way to think about doing it, depending on who you're dealing with. Second thing that I think is obviously preaching to the choir, but systems. Are the systems slowing down the growth of the company? And I think that there's basically two sides to that. There's the technology systems. For said company that is doing 20 to 30 million a year in construction services, when that business was purchased, it was largely a bunch of managers getting calls on their cell phones and taking orders with pen and paper. And somehow they scaled to that level, but they didn't really have a real CRM system to manage any of that. They didn't have an inbound calling system. So that was kind of an obvious, huge opportunity where if everything else fails, if you just build like a modern CRM system, you can probably 2 or 3x the business, right? And that's actually what we're seeing. um, that's the technological side. The other thing that is, I think, less touted but still very viable is just the processes side of the systems. So if you acquire a software business, for example, there's a lot of practices that the sales and accounts team might be doing that seem to be driving business. So maybe you don't want to break it, you don't want to touch it. But some common examples of things you can adjust to huge upside is, for example, you can shorten your sales cycle by something ridiculous if you just change like what your proof of concept timeline is or your free trial timeline is. I've seen businesses that have a 45-day proof of concept or free trial, but their actual value can be delivered in a week. And so if you start to toggle that, with different ICPs that you're dealing with, you can see a lot more cash a lot faster. Other thing I see is woefully behind in almost every single business, but often software businesses that have to pitch their wares, is the pitch itself, the process itself can be very rudimentary, very messy. Often it's not visual. It's just like somebody talking at you. I personally am a visual learner. And if somebody's trying to sell me a complex thing that's worth, over $20,000 a year and it's just words, I'm definitely not buying. So there's huge opportunities for just updating the sales and accounts processes, even outside of technology. So those are things that I'm sure many investors look for that as well, but maybe that's my particular sales tilt to that. And then is there a bottleneck on the product or service? This one can be, I think, very tricky. And it's something that I personally don't feel comfortable messing around with too much. But if the product or service is like woefully behind competitors and it's very easy to tweak, then that's something to think about. But it's not as easy as implementing a new sales playbook or integrating a CRM. I think it can be riskier. And then finally, obviously, the sales strategy itself is something that you can play with. I think an A+ opportunity is when the company has tried almost nothing and there are clear roadmaps from other companies that are selling to similar folks that are working really well, but the company has not done any of it. The reason I think there need to be several channels is because we're going to have a lot of hypotheses. Not all of them are going to work, or we might not be the team to execute on all of them. So you need a few different areas that could work so that you can shoot for the stars and land on the cloud.
Very nice. And so just lastly, if you're sitting in an investor seat where you're making a decision on a buyer, I guess, is there anything beyond, determining if that buyer is a happy or sad person that might help you? It might indicate whether or not they're going to be able to actually execute on that sales strategy as well.
Well, that's really interesting. I probably can't comment on that because I don't know enough about the psychology of buyers selling their small business. Oh, excuse me. Are you saying the psychology of a buy? Oh, the psychology like a somebody who runs a search fund, not a seller.
Yeah, exactly. A search fund. Yeah.
Like who should we bet on as a buyer?
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, you've talked about some of this just to kind of spark it, right? Like you said, you want to hire professionals, you want to hire folks who know the industry. Does that stuff apply? What if we're backing someone who doesn't necessarily have those skill sets? Are there other things we could look for to say, hey, this person, if they need to do founder-led sales, could learn it, or this person would be able to manage professionals who know the industry well, things like that?
Yeah. I think that the number one determinant of success in any hard business like this is how hard it is for this person to give up. And one of the ways to test for that is to figure out how big the chip is on their shoulder. And I think you kind of learn that over time. You don't necessarily learn it in one conversation. Anyone can sound motivated in one conversation. But the way I check this with founders is I offer my help and my support. I try to give founders as many easy layups as possible. Maybe that's connecting them with other investors. Maybe it's connecting them with potential partners. And I would say at the extremes, two things happen. Either they totally fumble the most obvious opportunity that I send them, and that tells me that they lack some level of motivation, maybe some aptitude too, but often I think it's more motivation than anything else. And then there are folks who can make lemonade out of like anything that you give them. And I think that's a really cool test of grit. I don't know exactly what that translates to in the ETA space necessarily, but the general principle of helping out and basically allowing folks to prove themselves over the course of time, I think is the best way to filter for grit, for intensity, for chip on the shoulder.
Yeah, that's a really great way to frame it. And, just to try and tie that concept into the ETA world more specifically, a lot of folks have said, what's one of the most important characteristics? It's tenacity in some cases is how people frame it, right? And I think that's very similar to what you're saying, right? So, to give people sort of layups that they can answer and demonstrate credibility or demonstrate motivation, I think is the right word for it. A lot of that, to your point, can come out through the diligence process, through asking the right questions. It's incumbent upon investors to ask the right questions in the first place. But if you're getting thoughtful answers, good turnaround times, and really, I guess the third prong at the higher end of the spectrum would be if, questions you ask then inspire certain behaviors like planning or putting together initiatives to mitigate risks beyond just answering the question. That could be a really similar tie-in to some of what you're talking about. So I think it's a great concept.
Another thing that occurs to me, I've seen plenty of people start searches and fail them. I know almost as many searchers who have stopped searching as I do searchers who have successfully acquired.
Yeah, it's good. The acquisition rate has been in decline, allegedly.
Yeah. And this is over years. This is even like before things got really competitive. I've just seen a lot of people drop out. I think the biggest determinant that I've seen, like anecdotally, is do they have a real reason to be doing this? I have a friend who purchased a $20 million a year landscaping company in Reno out of business school. And there was a real reason that he had to do this. And it sounds silly, but he has a family business, really big, successful family business. And his parents kept pulling him into the family business. He was the COO there for a while, and he just really did not like working with his family. But he had been indoctrinated into this idea that like you have to be successful, you have to build a big business. So what's a guy to do? He absolutely had to prove to his family, and not that it's like that superficial, right? I mean, he grew up being someone that was going to be an executive. Like he always knew that. But he just knew that he couldn't do it in his own company. So ETA was the most obvious, um, path for him. And I think that story, a version of that story exists in a lot of successful ETA founders. They have a real reason. You understand that through some combination of the story they tell, their background, and, testing them over time in some way, shape, or form.
Yeah, I mean, just getting through the search itself demonstrates grit and motivation, right? So I think there's a lot in that. Well, look, Tivan, any closing thoughts you have for us? Anything you want to end off with here?
I would say my favorite thing to do is help people, whether they are, we're doing business or not. So my advice is always free. You can always go to upwindcompanies.com and book a meeting with me. And good luck to everyone.
Very good. Well, thanks so much.
All right, take care.